there are some people in the world that have abnormal psychologies. And to understand them, we kind of have to use our imagination a bit, because they just don't operate in the world the way the vast majority of people do. And of particular interest to me is a group of individuals, perhaps less than 1% of the population, that I refer to as predators, as organizational predators, and as monsters when they are facilitated to do what their nature compels them to do. So I've been observing them and researching them for many, many years. And I have some insights about them I'd like to share, because it's important. Because the weakest state that an organization can be in is not to acknowledge that they exist. And so, respond and appropriately defend themselves from their nefarious dealings. Now, so let's explore the psychology. There's two characteristics. They have extreme levels of psychopathy and narcissism. So let's explore both of these. So psychopathy, and one of the reasons why we have to explore it is because they're not like you and me. They don't operate in the world like you and I. They do other stuff, and they pretend to be normal and act normally, but they're not. And one of their greatest fears is exposure. And we'll get onto this in time. But let's explore psychopathy. I think to truly understand psychopathy, it's not that these people don't care about others, because that indicates that, perhaps it's a misunderstanding, or perhaps it's some time or some discussion. They could care about people more. The reality of their lives since very early childhood is that they can't care about people. So just let that sink in. It's not that they don't care. It's they simply cannot. They do not have that facility. Now, so, and one of the harshest things about this is that this means they're inherently incompetent at being of service to others. It's a very harsh reality. It's like if you were a painter and you just had no interest or aptitude to painting, you would never be any good at painting. Or if you were a mechanic and you really detested working with your hands, just didn't like it, and no interest, no real aptitude, you couldn't be a good mechanic. So I want you to understand, they don't connect with people the way we do. And one person described their psychopathy like, helping others or doing good for others is about as interesting and engaging as having to do the dishes after dinner. It just doesn't register with them. It's just a trouble, a bother, and a nuisance at best. So they just operate differently. And this inherently means they can never develop competency in actually doing good in the world and making a meaningful contribution, because it just doesn't register with them. And there's another reason too why they can't do that. The second characteristic we'll talk about is really extreme levels of narcissism. And really, narcissism at its core is simply an individual who worships their idealized delusion of self. That they are great and wonderful and good, and and this is the delusion that they must bend the world to, and they must bend other people to this belief as well, so that they can get what we will refer to as narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply is when they can get confirmation from the world around them that this is indeed the case. They are truly a wonderful person. And the extreme levels of narcissistic supply would be referred to as narcissistic elation. That they have been, they have achieved some great high acknowledgement of how wonderful they are and how significant they are and how important they are and how much value they are. And the opposite of this then would be when they cannot get, when they are starved of narcissistic supply. That really is a difficult situation for them. And at its extreme, this is narcissistic annihilation. And that is like just their nightmare. And really, narcissistic annihilation is when they come to face with the truth and they just can't escape it. So just from observing them and how they operate, I think, again, we have to kind of use our imagination to understand how they operate in the world and what they do. So that's kind of how they operate internally. But what do they do in the world? What do they spend their days doing? Well, there's 4 things that they seek out as a way to understand them. And it is they seek out privilege, prestige, profit, and power, the 4 Ps. And that's what they're just spending all their lives, every day, seeking more and more of. And obviously, this is a part of narcissistic supply as well. It's all in there. So another thing is, from early in childhood, they realized they were different. They didn't operate in the world the rest as everybody else. And instead of being honest about this and saying, you know what, I seem to have some kind of a deficiency, that I just don't care. I can do things to others that a good person wouldn't do. So their interpretation of this from early years, a belief they defend intensely, is that this is not a deficit, that this is actually because they are superior. They are capable of doing things that others aren't doing, not because they have some deficit, but because they are superior. And that is a part of their delusion, and that is a part of what they seek validation for. They seek supply to confirm that this is the case throughout their lives and in all their doings. Now, to continue with how they operate, and there's a lot of work done and interesting observing them and explaining how they operate in relationships, but that's not particularly what this book is of interest in. I'm more interested in how they operate in organizations. And when they're in organizations and starting off on their journey in life, they go through 3 phases. The first phase is infiltration. And that is they're there, they don't have particular power. They're just there. They're being nice. They're compliant. They're going along. They're identifying how they can move up the ladder and get more power and prestige and all this stuff and seeking it. And basically presenting to the world and manipulating the world and manipulating their language and copying what other people are doing that seems to be rewarded and trying to look like them. And that is infiltration. And some of them can get quite good at it and some of them are not as good at it. So some of the ones that are good at it, they will proceed and they will kind of get further up and deeper into the organization, have more influence in it, and they will start grooming. And grooming is many facets. We can think of how they groom people. They want people who will go along with their norms and their delusion and their dishonesty and who will basically not be too worried about the truth, but more interested in supporting that individual on their journey forward. And grooming is also getting rid of people who have a problem with this, trying to get those out of the organization. Grooming is also a matter of creating norms that facilitate what they're about, facilitate them getting more power, more privilege, more prestige, more profit, facilitates them avoiding exposure, and we'll talk more about that, and getting those norms in place, and also getting rid of norms that wouldn't be conducive to an environment that they would like. And we will talk very specifically in chapter 4 about environments that they feel very uncomfortable in, that really don't work for them. And we can create those kind of environments, and that's a really good thing to do. It takes the air, the oxygen out of the room. It just really neutralizes them and their ability to do terrible things to organizations. And they just won't even want to be around that organization. And we talk about that in chapter 4. So that's it. They infiltrate, they groom. And then when they've groomed and their things are going well and they're making good progress, they start eventually to colonize. And colonize means that the whole organization starts to embrace norms that are suitable to them, and that the things we talk about in chapter 4 are just not present in that organization. And they start getting people around them that either are like them or are okay to go along with what they do, or they can manipulate and groom to their ends, and so on. So that's an organization starts to become colonized, and at that point, it's really dysfunctional and incompetent, and they have to do a lot of work at making it appear otherwise, which is basically their whole life. As I said, they're not competent, they're not good at helping people and making the world better, but they want power, privilege, prestige, and profit. So they have to feign competence, they have to make the appearance, and so on. They have to create an environment where they can get away with that. And so this is what happens. And if it's allowed to proceed, if the things that I encourage in chapter 4 are not present in the organization, in many organizations, these monsters will colonize them. And eventually what they will start to do is to coalesce, to connect, to try and create a network of people with similar agendas that are okay to go along with, either because they are like these monsters or because they are groomed, and some people are more prone to being groomed than others. And they will try and create a network where people who are not okay to go along with the norms of what they like are just in many ways excluded and punished and kicked out. And so they coalesce, and ultimately they create the superclass.